For 6 years, she was a prisoner here, separated from her family.
My youngest son was only 12 when I was put under house arrest, and I think I felt that very deeply.
A Nobel Prize winner. The world couldn't see her or hear from her until now.
I was a prisoner, but I felt that I was free because I was not frightened. And I thought that a lot of people who are out there were living in such difficult circumstances. Perhaps they were less free than I was.
Tonight, Free from Fear, the incredible story of Aung San Suu Kyi.
This is ABC News Nightline. Substituting for Ted Koppel and reporting from Washington, Forrest Sawyer.
Once in a while, rarely in fact, political reality is shaped not by greed or power or the need for security, but by sheer moral force. Mahatma Gandhi leading India to its independence. Nelson Mandela bringing South Africa toward equality. Tonight, we want to introduce you to a remarkable woman who is struggling to bring justice to her own country and has endured much to do it. She is named Aung San Suu Kyi, and she lives in the nation of Burma, known there as Myanmar. For 6 years, Burma's military dictatorship kept her under house arrest at her home because of her push for democratic reform. But finally, on Monday, long after she had won the Nobel Peace Prize for her struggle, and after world pressure had increasingly strained the government, Suu Kyi was freed. Today, she still will not venture beyond the walls of her home, but her followers have gathered outside, waiting to hear where she wants to lead them. Of that, she says, she is uncertain.
I'm not in a hurry to rush into anything. I'm not in a hurry to prove anything. Whatever I do, I want it to be of solid value to the country.
But she is speaking to the world at last, granting her first television interview to BBC correspondent Fergal Keane. For years, Suu Kyi had listened to Keane's radio reports on Nelson Mandela's struggle for democracy in South Africa. She showed the correspondent the democracy banners she had refused to pull down. The words that inspired her. I like discipline in life and dislike anarchy and disorder and inefficiency. Suu Kyi has emerged from her years of isolation unbound and even more committed to political reform in her country, a point she made very clear when she sat down to speak to Fergal Keane.
Can you first tell me, how does it feel to be free?
On Monday, when I knew I was going to be free, I didn't know what to think. I thought, I'm going to be free.
What was the low point for you of your imprisonment?
I think it was the first few years that were more difficult before I digested. After about 1990, 91, well, I thought, well, Nelson Mandela took 27 years. I can do the same if necessary.
Really?
I felt that, yes.
I remember speaking to Nelson Mandela shortly after he came out of prison, and he told me the thing he found hardest wasn't so much the sacrifice which he himself made, but what was happening to his family.
Exactly. I felt the same way about my sons. Not so much about my husband, because I felt he was grown up, he could take care of himself, after all, he's a man. But my sons were very young. And my youngest son was only 12 when I was first put under house arrest, and I think I felt that very deeply. But there was no point in my going round and round worrying about what was happening to them. I was under house arrest because of my politics, so politics became my whole life, and most of the time I spent thinking about politics. And I made a conscious effort not to think too much about my family. It didn't help, really.
So if the plan of the regime was to break your spirit by putting you away, you say it had quite the opposite effect.
Absolutely. I don't think I was really that political, even when I was running around the country campaigning, because I liked to keep a part of myself private for my family, for my friends, because I know that it's unhealthy to get too terribly political. But once you're alone as a political prisoner, then politics is your whole existence. That's your raison d'etre.
Again, it was Mandela who said to me that what motivated him was the power of an idea, the idea of freedom. Is that what motivates you?
Yes. The idea of real freedom, which I've always said is freedom from fear. You know, you can be. I was a prisoner, but I felt that I was free because I was not frightened. So for me, real freedom is freedom from fear.
What did you do to keep yourself going? I mean, to me, the idea of sitting in a house all day, whether it's a prison cell or a house doesn't really matter, would drive me insane.
Well, I listened to the radio a lot. I read a lot. I didn't write very much simply because I didn't like to keep writing inside the house in case they wanted to come and search it or anything like that. They didn't do anything such thing. But I suppose I was just being cautious. I don't like to leave writing lying around.
People are worrying that conditions have been attached to your release. Have you compromised?
No, not at all. And I think they know that there was no point in asking me if I would accept any conditions. They didn't even ask me. They didn't even make any such suggestion.
Why have they done it?
Why have they released me, you mean? I think they had realized that the time was right. And I think it does help that I had friends all over the world who were working for my release. I think it helps. People say that it makes no difference, that international pressure gets nowhere. But we don't live in an isolated country anymore. More and more people are coming in, and we cannot shut out the world. And I think the opinion of other countries, of the international community, does matter. And I don't think anybody with any sense can really ignore it.
Because this country does have a long history of fighting between different groups. Some of that's been exploited by the government, ethnic division particularly. Can you be a unifying figure in a country like this?
I hope I can be, but I hope the unity of the country does not depend on one unifying figure. I want to very much to engage in dialogue with the regime, with other parties in Burma, with all those concerned ethnic groups. I think we should all sit around the table and talk about our problems, about our difficulties, and try to sort them out. I want them to really want to do that, not just, well, I'll take part in these negotiations and see what I can get out of it for myself.
In doing that, in having negotiations, do you still hold to your basic belief that only democracy will work for Burma? Will that be your aim in negotiations?
Yes. I believe that democracy is so far the best political system we have discovered. And without going into too many details, I think this is proved by the fact that there have been no wars at all between truly practicing liberal democratic countries this century. Some people say that, Asians are used to accepting the rule of the elders. They really don't understand democracy. They really don't hanker after freedom. It is not so. The Burmese people love freedom.
Finally, your message to the world outside, the people who've been campaigning on your behalf and those who've taken an interest in what's happening here.
First of all, thank you. Just simply thank you. And secondly, this is not yet the end. There's a long way to go, and the way might be very, very hard. So please stand by. Don't think this is the end. Don't think that we're there home and dry. We've got a long way to go yet. I'm afraid that people might think this is it. We can now sit back and relax.
Later in the broadcast, we will hear more from Aung San Suu Kyi. But first, when we return, a look at why so many people in her nation live in fear. A report from Burma. It is only recently that Burma has begun encouraging tourism. Joining us now from London, ABC's Hilary Brown, who has recently returned there, and I suppose Burma is nothing like what most people know as the kind of country they want to visit as a tourist, Hilary.
Well, no, they don't know at all because, of course, it has been a sort of secret pariah state for over a quarter of a century. But now the generals running the country want to end its international isolation, gain respectability, and this campaign to attract mass tourism is part of that. In fact, it's thought that this may be one reason why Suu Kyi was released so unexpectedly and in almost a sort of casual way. They recognize that they can't invite the world to come and see them if they're holding the world's most famous a political dissident. I went into the country with a high-8 camera with my husband as a tourist, and what I found was this invisible climate of fear. People anxious to talk to you but terrified to do so because they know that they can be thrown into jail for years sometimes for criticizing the regime, and there is a huge network of informers to report to military intelligence. As human beings, we felt inhibited, in fact, about talking to people for fear of endangering their lives. It is, having said that, an absolutely stunning country, but here's what you should know about it if you think of taking a trip there. The Shwedagon Pagoda, the heart and soul of Rangoon. Once the chief place of pilgrimage for Buddhists everywhere. The place where Burmese can exercise the only real freedom they have, prayer. If it were anywhere else in the world, it would be teeming with foreign tourists and pilgrims. For the Shwedagon is as sacred to world Buddhism as Mecca is to Islam or St. Peter's to Christendom. It is an architectural wonder. Its spectacular spire is said to contain more gold than the Bank of England. But Burma's appalling record on human rights has made the country an international pariah, an isolated hermit state. As I entered its cool marble courtyard and rang its famous bells, I felt a bit like the last Western woman on earth. Among the thousands here, I saw less than half a dozen Westerners, though all that may be about to change. For over a quarter of a century, under the xenophobic dictatorship of General Ne Win, the Burmese government limited foreign visits to a stay of 1 day. The current regime, the SLORC, has stretched that to 30 days, and foreign tourists are now welcome here, as long as they bring lots of hard currency and leave any Western democratic ideas at home. The SLORC generals looked fat and happy at this 7 a.m. reception that we managed to gate crash on Union Day. They proclaimed 1996 as Visit Myanmar Year, Myanmar being their unlovely name for Burma. They think they can attract 500,000 tourists next year. That's quite a target, especially when you consider the state of the Rangoon office of the Internal Airlines. In the half hour we spent observing this bedlam, we didn't see a single ticket issued. The Army dominates people's lives here, just as the Shwedagon dominates the skyline of Rangoon. As part of the effort to gain international respectability, soldiers have now largely been confined to barracks, though you know they could come out any time. This is the army that slaughtered 3,000 of its own people in democracy demonstrations in 1988. They could do it again if ordered. The SLORC is trying to end Burma's isolation by opening up to foreign trade and switching from socialism to a market economy. The shops are now full of electronic and other goods previously unobtainable. Curbside pharmacies are piled high with prescription drugs, available without prescription. What the SLORC generals want you to see are scenes like this, the strange and lovely floating market at Yuama on Inle Lake. Boats glide past each other as if in slow motion, selling everything from rice cakes to scales for trade. You simply extend a languid arm over the side and stop the boat as it drifts past. What they don't want you to see, or hope you won't notice, is the forced labor on the roads you have to take to reach these dreamlike destinations. The roads are being built by hand, by thousands of villagers who are simply ordered to work all day for no pay. The work gangs I saw were mainly women and children. Children as young as 8, moving rocks and stones in the blistering heat from dawn until dusk. It's a shocking sight. Yet the people don't complain. They smiled, even laughed at my approach. It's different in the remote areas off limits to travelers, where conditions are reportedly so bad that thousands of villagers have left their homes and fled across the border to Thailand. I drove for 3 hours through the jungle to find this camp of 3,000 Burmese refugees. Here I met people who had been press ganged by the Burmese army and made to work as porters in the army's attacks on ethnic minorities, acting as human shields. These men both lost a leg stepping on a mine. Press ganging is another common practice the SLORC doesn't want you to see. Even Even those who were at the vanguard of the democracy movement 7 years ago, such as the monks of Mandalay, are now too terrified to talk to visitors about practically anything. Spies are everywhere, reporting to the secret police.
People are afraid of everything.
They're afraid of everything.
Yeah. Yes.
They're afraid to talk.
Yes, they're afraid. Okay.
What happens if they talk? Politics.
But it's they're very easy to go to Moscow.
Very easy to go to Moscow. You mean to prison?
Yes, yes.
Usually, you don't see the injustice that you know is there. In Pagan, for example, what you see is an extraordinary archaeological landscape strewn with 2,200 medieval temples, enough to lure 100 Indiana Jones. 5 years ago, this peaceful, pagoda-studded plain was also the site of a lively village of 5,000 people. But they were too friendly with the foreigners, so the village was bulldozed to the ground, and the people were moved by force to a new town 5 miles away. Each family was paid $2.50 compensation. Across the country, at least 1 million people have been uprooted this way, most from the center of Rangoon to satellite towns across the river. We drove to one such town called Hlang Ter, built on a swamp. Only one road leads in and out. You could see how easily it could be cut off from the capital should the people ever rise up again. The fact is that Burma doesn't look like the nasty police state that it is. Burma looks like a lovely, unspoiled, and very strange place. A place, for example, where fishermen paddle their canoes with their feet from a standing position. A place where the men wear skirts and the women smoke cigars or whackin' white cheroots, as Kipling once wrote. A place of such charm and beauty that you can forget where you really are.
Hillary, I remember when Nelson Mandela was released from his imprisonment in South Africa, you got the feeling that things were changing very rapidly there. You do not, I gather, have that feeling here in Burma.
No, you don't. And Burmese inside Burma have that feeling too. I know this because exiles here have been in touch with them, and what they're saying is that mixed with the joy over her release is the fear that this is a trap, that there could be a sting to this tale. There's a battery of laws that they can use against her and against anyone who might be attracted to come to see her. They've seen this before in the democracy movement in 1988. It flowered before it was so brutally put down, and it could happen again.
You get that feeling from Suu Kyi herself with the way that she is talking, a very conciliatory line that she is following with the military dictatorship. She seems to be wanting to find that line where they can get along with each other.
Yes, she does. I mean, she combines this extraordinary moral grandeur with great cleverness. She's very astute, and I think she wants to help the military reform itself.
Certainly there's an awful lot of speculation about why the government would release Suu Kyi now after these 6 years. Do they need the world's help so much that they're willing to risk having her out there saying the things she's certainly going to say?
Well, they want to end their international isolation. They want to open up to cross-border trade, and indeed they have done so, end the state-controlled economy. And of course, no state wants international opprobrium. It hurts them.
Hillary Brown in London, thank you very much, Hillary. Hillary talked about the moral power of Suu Kyi, and we do want you to hear some more of what she had to say. We'll have that for you when we come back in just a moment. Freedom is something many of us take for granted, something that is perhaps best appreciated by someone whose freedom has been threatened, like Aung San Suu Kyi. Listen to the last part of the BBC interview with her.
Was it a very emotional moment for you when you actually realized that those lonely years of imprisonment were over?
I've never thought of loneliness as an important factor during all these years. I've never thought of myself as lonely. And in fact, I've very often thought, I'm quite free. I don't know why people say I'm not free. I'm free because I was free up there, so I felt free.
And that's why it matters.
Yes, that's where it matters. And I've always felt free because they have not been able to do anything to what really mattered, my mind, my principles, what I believed in. They were not able to touch that, so I was free. And once you're free inside, and once you feel that I can accept whatever happens to me, so long as I'm working for something that is right, then I think you're free. That's how I felt. Unless you can live free from fear, you cannot live a dignified human life. It's not possible. If you're always having to think, what will somebody do to me if I say this? What will somebody do to my family if I do that? What will happen to my family if I say this? What will happen to me if I do that? That's not the sort of life I want to live, and that's not the sort of life I want my people to live. So yes, it's the idea of freedom, real freedom, which comes from inside.
That is Aung San Suu Kyi free after 6 years. That is our report for tonight. I'm Forrest Sawyer in Washington. For all of us here at ABC News, good night.